About 2 weeks ago, I upgraded from a 2018 12.9-inch iPad Pro to the new beastly 12.9 with Apple's custom M1 chip. And I can confidently say this new iPad is unequivocally, irrefutably, without a doubt, not terribly revolutionary, but that's okay. With Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, or WWDC, just days away, those of us bullish on iPad are really hoping Apple announces substantial iPadOS updates to inch us ever closer to a true desktop class experience. So, because I feel we don't yet know the full M1 iPad story, this video is not a full review. But despite all this, I'm going to give you my top 5 reasons why I do think it's a worthy upgrade now, even before any announcements Apple has in store for us on Monday.
One Tech Mind.
The first reason the new M1 iPad Pro is a worthy upgrade is the Liquid Retina XDR display, only available on the 12.9-inch version. The new mini LED display is honestly the main reason I bought this new iPad. I love watching movies or shows in Dolby Vision HDR, and I've always found the brightness of my 2018 iPad Pro a bit lacking. So naturally, I've watched quite a bit of HDR content on the display over the past 2 weeks, including Guardians of the Galaxy in full, among a bunch of other stuff. And I noticed major improvements in 2 key areas. First, in addition to the display being capable of much higher overall brightness, when you watch scenes that have large degrees of contrast between highlights and shadows in HDR, the highlights are displayed much brighter thanks to the local dimming zones that can selectively brighten parts of the display. This looks fantastic in person and offers a more immersive watching experience than ever before on an iPad. The second benefit is related to black levels, which are noticeably darker on the M1 iPad. This is thanks to the Mini LED's backlight technology, and it also means you won't see that grayish haze letterbox on the top and bottom of your videos anymore. Finally, I always found that so distracting. It's also much easier to see your content when you're outside in the sunlight. I scripted a whole video outdoors in the middle of the day and had no problems reading the screen at all. I did have to bump the brightness up quite a bit, but that was expected because I was outside. I also didn't really notice much of a difference in terms of screen reflectivity compared to my old 2018 iPad, so you can expect the same experience when it comes to the new one. And while I'm not really a photographer, I can only imagine the quality of this display will make it even easier to perform color correction and edits for the real pros. It certainly does for me with the light photo editing that I do. If you want to see how the real pro photographers do it, check out the review Austin Mann did on his website. I'll link that down below in the description. The reviews he does from a photography perspective on Apple devices are top notch. And by the way, when I watched all 2 hours and 2 minutes of Guardians at 100% brightness, I lost only 23% of battery, going from 90% to 67. So around 10% an hour, which I think is pretty amazing. Now, you may have heard this new display has a bloom effect around white tinted content, especially when it's displayed on a darker background. Well, I'm here to tell you that on my particular model, this is not an issue at all, and I couldn't do this video without mentioning it. Is it noticeable? Kind of, sort of, but not in a way that's obvious or distracting, and it's a known caveat of the Mini LED technology and displays with local dimming zones in general for HDR content, including televisions. For me, it's actually the most noticeable at the edges of the display, where things feel just a little bit softer than my old iPad or even my iPhone with an OLED screen, almost as if there's a slight inner shadow to the screen. But again, in practice and after using it for 2 weeks, I really view this as a non-issue, taking into account all the pros of the display. In short, if you're worried about this bloom effect, I'm here to tell you it's no big deal. Although there will always be differences between displays of the same model in the same product because of the manufacturing process. This is also true of TVs, and it's something we in the biz like to call the panel lottery. Number 2 is related to the old Magic Keyboard. The 2020 Magic Keyboard I've been using with my old iPad Pro works just fine on my new one. It fits and holds the iPad without any issues at all, and I've never given it a second thought. Now, this was my suspicion when the hearsay was going around about the Magic Keyboard being incompatible with the new M1 iPad. And it just goes to show that It's worth taking every report about these things with a grain of salt until Apple actually weighs in directly, which they did a few days later, or things are independently verified. Long story short, if you have last year's Magic Keyboard, you can keep on using it on the new iPad without any tangible difference. The third reason is performance. I'm going to say this as simply as possible. Compared to my 2018 iPad Pro, everything is just faster and more responsive, which on the surface sounds kind of boring because we've reached a point in computing where that has become table stakes. And the 2018 iPad Pro is still no slouch, but on the M1 iPad, apps load even quicker with no lag at all when using split view and slide over, multitasking, or playing games with a controller like the PS5 DualSense, now supported on iOS 14.5. Even apps that were loaded hours ago resume without hesitation. But a couple more things to note. My iPad has 256 gigs of storage, which means it has 8 gigs of RAM or memory with which to run applications. And since I don't perform intensive work on my iPad, I've had no problems with this at all. I do some light graphic design in Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer. I manage my YouTube channel on it. It's my primary device for doing that. So I use things like Bear Notes for scripting, apps that aren't incredibly intensive, but some of them can push the boundary a little bit. And I also do a lot of multitasking. The 1 and 2 terabyte models both have 16 gigs of RAM, and traditionally, this means things should be even snappier on those models depending on what you're doing with them. However, it was recently discovered by the developer of Art Studio Pro, the M1 iPads can only use up to 5 gigs of RAM in their present state anyway. So the 8 and 16 gigs of RAM sound pretty useless unless this gets opened up via iPadOS 15 on Tuesday, right, Apple? One of the other notable upgrades is the inclusion of the super fast Thunderbolt 3 technology built into the USB-C connector that offers transfer speeds of up to 40 gigabits per second, useful for transferring files from an external drive. If you're interested in real-world test results on this, please go check out this awesome video my fellow creator bud Kevin Ross did on this very subject. Kevin does an amazing job at teasing out these technical details via thorough real-world testing, and he discovered some truly surprising results when it comes to data transfer speeds, both while directly connected to the USB-C port and via a Thunderbolt dock. Make sure you subscribe to his channel as well for some killer content. The fourth reason, Center Stage and Face ID. The new Center Stage feature, which digitally pans and tilts to keep your face in frame on FaceTime calls and the like, is surprisingly awesome, but it really blows you away when you see it in person because it's one of those things you forget is even there. So when you jump on a FaceTime call and you're fidgeting in your chair, or you reach over to grab something on your desk and it follows you, you just can't help but smile at the ingenuity of it all. It will even dynamically expand the frame when other people come into view, even when they're just on the verge of the camera's focal length. It also helps alleviate some of the oddness of the camera being on the side of the display when the iPad's in landscape mode instead of the top where a webcam should be. I also feel like Face ID is a little more reliable on this new model, especially when you're like at the edge of the detectable distance or at odd angles. And Apple didn't specifically say anything about Face ID improvements, but I definitely have noticed a difference. And the fifth and last reason why the 12.9 M1 iPad Pro is a worthy upgrade over the 2018, it's gonna sound a little weird, but hear me out. It's the built-in speakers. The ones in this year's model are packing an even bigger punch. Not only does the new iPad sound louder, I'm also hearing better bass definition and just an overall much fuller and richer sound. By comparison, my old iPad sounds quite tinny when you listen to them side by side. It's really hard to demonstrate audio quality over YouTube videos, so you're just gonna have to take my word on it for this one. Tablet speakers are only gonna be so good because they are relatively small, but if you value having the best speakers possible for your use case in a tablet, the ones in the new iPad Pro are straight fire. Like I said at the beginning, I'm placing my faith in Apple to continue to invest more time and resources into iPadOS until we reach a feature parity, if you will, between software and this crazy hardware. So for these reasons, the M1 iPad Pro, I think, is a worthy upgrade from the 2018 model. But if you were to compare it to any more recent iPad like last year's Pro or Air, the upgrade worthiness is going to wane a bit. But that's just what I think, so let me know in the comments below if you think this sounds like a worthy enough upgrade from the 2018 model, or maybe another iPad model that you might have. So because of all the anticipation for WWDC and the iPad, I'm gonna do my first ever reaction type video where you can see my reaction and first impressions and thoughts to the announcements as they were happening. And I'll make sure to have that video out for you as soon as possible after the event. So make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss that video come Monday. And also let me know in the comments what features that you really hope Apple announces for iPad or otherwise. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter for daily Apple and tech anecdotes and analysis. You can also reach out to me with any feedback or suggestions you have for the channel. And until next time, thanks for listening to my One Tech Mind.